Money for nothing? Pro-lifers are concerned after the spending bill includes funds for Planned Parenthood. We have reaction. Death of a pioneer. The girl at the center of a landmark Supreme Court case that ended segregation in schools has died. Remembering Mother Angelica. We discuss the life and legacy of the founder of EWTN on the second anniversary of her death. And a fighting habit. A group of nuns in Poland hits the gym for a good cause. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 27, 2018.
Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The White House defends a change to the U.S. Census, even though Democrats cry foul. The Department of Commerce sparked the controversy by including a question about the citizenship status in the upcoming 2020 census. Democrats argue it would intimidate immigrants and discourage them from participating, but the White House says it's been standard practice for decades. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Good evening, Wyatt. The Democratic minority leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, says adding the question about citizenship will cause vulnerable communities to be underrepresented, financially excluded, and left behind. The White House says this question has always been asked, except during the last census count in 2010, and it's a matter of following the law.
I would argue that this has been practice of the United States government. The purpose is to determine individuals that are here. It also helps to comply with the Voting Rights Act.
The Commerce Department agrees the citizenship information will help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act, which protects minority voting rights. And Republican Senator Ted Cruz calls the citizenship question a reasonable, common sense addition to the census. But California's Attorney General says it's not just a bad idea, it's illegal. Wyatt, I spoke with Bill Canny, the Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Canny says undocumented immigrants may not respond to this question, and that could lower the population count and affect the distribution of federal funds to local communities.
Mark, today the bishops made an appeal to the Trump administration to reconsider their policy on refugees. What are they asking for?
The Trump administration has lowered the number of refugees allowed in the country from 95,000 to 45,000 for fiscal year 2018. The bishops say it's the lowest refugee cap in history, and it may not even be reached this year. They want the administration to increase that number next year, Wyatt.
It's a subject they've been talking about for a while now. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. The list of countries expelling Russian diplomats have grown to more than 24. This after a former Moscow spy was poisoned in the UK. House Majority Leader Paul Ryan, on a tour of the Czech Republic, says the response is justified.
We must see this for what it is. This is an attempt to sow discord among our people, to divide allies, and to destabilize democratic institutions.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says his country will respond, adding no country would tolerate such obnoxiousness. Russia denies responsibility for the poisoning. Federal funds are still flowing to the United States' largest abortion provider. A Trump official tells News Nightly the White House is disappointed the spending bill signed last week allows for the funding of Planned Parenthood. Our Jason Calvi is on Capitol Hill, where that vote needed 60 votes in the Senate to pass. Hello, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. The spending bill did not mention Planned Parenthood, and without a specific defunding measure, the group is still receiving Title X family planning money and Medicaid reimbursements. This is an issue President Trump and other Republicans campaigned on in 2016, and their inaction is prompting criticism.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump promised pro-life leaders he was committed to defunding Planned Parenthood as long as they continue to perform abortions. Despite that, the president on Friday signed the spending bill, which doesn't strip money from the abortion provider.
I say to Congress, I will never sign another bill like this again. I'm not going to do it again.
Conservative Republican Ted Cruz voted against the bill in part over this issue. It continues to fund Planned Parenthood, a corrupt organization whose horrifying abortion practices should preclude it from receiving taxpayer dollars. The House Freedom Caucus, a conservative coalition, urged a presidential veto.
Planned Parenthood gets money.
In fact, Planned Parenthood's largest source of income is the government. In 2016, the abortion provider received $543 million in federal, state, and local funds. But the Trump administration has taken steps to dial it back. In early 2017, Congress, with the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Pence,
and the motion to proceed is agreed to,
scrapped an Obama-era rule that protected Planned Parenthood. Another recent step includes opening up that funding for groups that promote natural methods for family planning.
These changes are so important because they really do redistribute the funds to comprehensive health care providers instead of what we saw under the Obama administration, where they were prioritizing groups like Planned Parenthood who use abortion as a method of family planning.
Now, one thing to add, the spending bill does preserve the Hyde Amendment. That bars federal money from going to elective abortions. Now, look for these issues to heat up the midterm campaign trail as the control of Congress hangs in the balance. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. A retired Supreme Court justice is calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. In the New York Times, 97-year-old John Paul Stevens says he wants to weaken the NRA's ability to block constructive gun control laws. Stevens also says the March for Our Lives shows support for new legislation. That includes increasing the minimum age to buy firearms and prohibiting civilian ownership of semi-automatic weapons. Christopher Bedford, the editor-in-chief at the Daily Caller, joins me now with more analysis. Chris, we saw hundreds of thousands of Americans come out, talk about the issue of gun control this weekend. Do you think Americans would ever, though, go as far as supporting a repeal to the Second Amendment?
No, I don't think they would. And I think that if Republicans actually picked up this issue and stopped being afraid, by the way, they were terrified. One of the reasons they passed this spending bill as quickly as they did is because no one, conservatives or liberals, wanted their boss to be in Washington, D.C. when this march came into town. They're ready to book it out, and they sold out a lot of things. It's only part of the reason. If Republicans made they're trying to take your guns an issue in this election, they may have an actual chance at getting the GOP voters and the GOP base as juiced up as the Democrats already are by Donald Trump. Now, and Justice John Paul Stevens here, he's reiterating a point he's largely made for years. In his book in 2014, he said that the Second Amendment should be refined to be just people in a militia. He wrote that opinion basically in his leading the dissent in the Heller case. And Catholics may remember him as someone who also wrote the majority opinion in the ending of silent prayer allowed in schools.
And so obviously, like you said, this is going to continue to be a big issue as we move into the midterm elections. Let me switch gears, though, because I want to talk about the proposed addition to the citizenship question in the 2020 census that Mark Irons had reported on. And he had mentioned that the California Attorney General, as well as many other attorneys general, are going to sue the Trump administration over its decisions. Do you think what they're saying about how the citizenship question will endanger immigrants is real, is plausible?
Well, no. Nothing in the census will endanger anyone. It's just a series of questions that are asked. But they've got a real voter strategy here. They're calling it insidious to try and ask people what their immigration status is. But what they're really trying to do is juice up the numbers of the state and count people who aren't in the country legally as members of that state. Because then the census is used to decide how many congressmen a state gets, how many California will get, how many Arizona will get, Texas get, Massachusetts. And also then to decide electoral votes for that state. But Congress, Democratic representation in Congress is more important to them. And they're afraid that if legal immigrants don't fill out that census out of fear, that they'll lose congressmen, and it's probably true.
So it's all about the votes for many of them, isn't it? Many Americans don't, I want to switch gears also, because many Americans don't want their tax dollars to go to funding Planned Parenthood. As Jason Calvi was reporting on, the spending bill allows for its funding, though. Do you think pro-life lawmakers are scared to act because of the midterm elections?
I can't imagine why they're so afraid to act. This spending bill was such a disaster for anyone who's got any kind of conservative or pro-life ideas. The Republicans didn't just bribe Democrats with a bridge here or a stadium there, the old-fashioned way. They funded pet projects. They gave $500 million to Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood says they're not spending it on abortion, but we saw when Republicans for a moment tried to take that money away a few years ago, all the advocates for Planned Parenthood were saying you're attacking women's access to abortion. They showed their true colors. Republicans were unable to stand for that because they were offered the crack pipe of military spending, and they all just passed it around, and they passed restrictions on ICE, restrictions on immigration enforcement, restrictions on border protections, and gave $500 million to Planned Parenthood, money to sanctuary cities. It was a betrayal, and pro-life voters should remember that.
What do you think this says about the lobbying power of Planned Parenthood and how effective they can be?
It's amazing. But I think like a lot of us thought, that the Republicans had already weathered that storm. No matter what they voted on, they're going to be attacked in campaign advertisements by the Planned Parenthood lobby. But everything that we've seen, and survey after survey, has shown that, well, America has grown more liberal on issues such as marriage. They've grown more conservative on issues such as abortion. And as science has gone on and been able to show what's going on in the woman's body and when a child can feel pain, we've learned more, and our attitudes have started to change much more in line with the churches.
So many important issues here, especially as we approach midterm elections. Christopher Bedford, the editor-in-chief at the Daily Caller, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Linda Brown, who was at the center of a landmark Supreme Court case when she was a young girl, has died. The case ended racial segregation in public schools in America.
Linda Brown's father tried to enroll her in an all-white school in Topeka, Kansas in 1954. The school turned her and several more black families away, leading to an NAACP lawsuit. The 1954 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court followed, striking down racial segregation in schools and cementing Brown's place in history as a central figure in the landmark case. The 9 justices all ruled schools could not be separate but equal, ending public school segregation. The court said separating black and white children was unconstitutional because it denied black children the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law. 40 years later, in 1994, Brown lamented Topeka schools were still under court order to desegregate.
We feel disheartened that 40 years later we're still talking about desegregation of schools, but it is very necessary that the struggle continue because for generations coming on behind us, we have to be ever mindful of what's going to happen for them.
A Topeka funeral home confirms Linda Brown was 75 when she died on Sunday.
The State Department honors an Italian Catholic nun. 74-year-old Sister Maria Elena Barini works in war-torn parts of Africa. First Lady Melania Trump presented the International Women of Courage Award to her and 9 other winners. Mrs. Trump says courage is what sets apart the heroes from the rest. Protesters in Russia demand action after a fire kills at least 64 people, many of them children, while they were inside a shopping mall in Siberia. Chanting the truth, demonstrators say they believe the death toll is closer to 80 people. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the area. He has opened a criminal probe saying the deaths were caused by sloppiness. More than 100 protesters hold a Lent-themed demonstration in the Philippines. They're rallying against President Duterte's violent crackdown on drugs. Some in the crowd wore a crown of thorns, others carried a cross. The country is more than 80% Catholic. A rise in violent conflicts in Yemen since 2015 has led to nearly 500,000 children dropping out of school. A new UNICEF report says an additional 4.5 million children are at grave risk. Almost 3/4 of public school teachers have not been paid in over a year. The report comes as Yemen begins its 4th year of its civil war. Myanmar's army chief argues rebel groups to agree to a ceasefire. At an annual military parade, the general said decades of armed conflict have caused the country's development to lag behind its neighbors. The rebels say they want a political solution before laying down their arms. They accuse the military of widespread human rights abuses. And Myanmar's cardinal urges this Easter message to emphasize hope. Cardinal Charles Bo tells the country to reject hatred and ethnic conflict, saying, "Let Easter's wonder touch every soul in this country." A government crackdown has led to more than 700,000 Muslim refugees to flee the country for Bangladesh. A bishop in China's underground church has been detained. Asia News reports Bishop Vincent Gua Zhizhen and his chancellor were taken away by authorities Monday at the start of Holy Week. The news comes as the Vatican lays the groundwork for a historic deal with the communist country. The proposal would force the bishop to step down. Beijing would appoint his replacement. Pope Francis pays a surprise visit to the Vatican's Secretariat of State. The Holy Father met with many of the 300 employees. They're in charge of the Holy See's political and diplomatic functions. The Pope gave them a blessing for their work. He previously visited the offices in 2013. And another visit for Pope Francis today. The Holy See press office says the Holy Father visited with Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI this afternoon. Francis wished Benedict a happy Easter. The meeting comes after Francis' communications chief resigned over his misrepresentation of a letter from the Pope Emeritus.
Coming up, a life and a legacy. We remember Mother Angelica, founder of EWTN, on the 2nd anniversary of her death. And music to our ears. The Pope's Choir is touring America this summer. We have the details.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Today we honor Mother Mary Angelica of the Annunciation. She founded EWTN, which would become the world's largest religious media network. She passed into eternity 2 years ago today.
Eternal Word Television Network, built for you.
Mother Angelica was born Rita Rizzo in Canton, Ohio in 1923. EWTN was the first Catholic satellite TV station in the United States. Mother was remembered at a Mass at the Vatican today. Cardinal Edwin O'Brien, who celebrated the Mass, tells our Vatican correspondent, Juliet Lindley, Mother leaves behind a great legacy.
Well, I think she has affected the lives of many, many Catholics while she was with us alive. And those Catholics are richer as a result. And they are probably living and spreading the faith as a result of her influence. I think what she has established as a foundation in the Eternal Word Television Network is able to reach out to these newer forms of communication as they come along. She started from nothing and was convinced that if this God's will, it would grow. And she put herself completely at the will of God and the Church. And she was very determined and very forceful and very attractive to a cross-section of Catholics in our country especially. And I presume that we can say that for Europe and South America as well.
Mother passed away on Easter Sunday in 2016. She was 92. Today, EWTN reaches more than 260 million homes around the world. Joining us now from EWTN's headquarters in Irondale, Alabama is Doug Keck, President and Chief Operating Officer at EWTN. Doug, how would you describe Mother's legacy both in the church and in the world?
Well, I think it's a powerful legacy that transcends the church and the world and the culture because of the fact of coming in the media as she did and continuing on with her timeless programs that air on EWTN weekly. I think she touches a whole new generation of younger people and continues to touch many of us. I think as the shows get older, and I think as I get older, I get more out of what Mother has to say. And it's a combination of dealing with tough circumstances with a very tender faith. And I think it comes through as very real to people today who want transparency and authenticity.
You began your career with EWTN in 1996. You worked alongside Mother Angelica for many years. What is your fondest memory of Mother?
Well, I think my fondest memory of Mother is the fact that I learned that someone could care deeply, love our Lord, care about their faith, and still be a lot of fun to work with. And that in doing the Lord's work and being involved with your faith doesn't mean putting on a sourpuss face and acting overly pious. It means loving the Lord, getting the fulfillment from working on something that's so meaningful and so many people's lives have been helped spiritually around the globe, and we hear about it all the time. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of attacks. We saw Mother go underneath those spiritually and even, in a sense, dealing inside the church at times in the past, and she just kept going no matter what because she loved our Lord, and it was her mission, and we try to stay true to her mission.
How do you think that, in working with Mother Angelica and seeing all that, impact you personally, Doug?
Well, I think it impacted me personally in the sense that I got to listen to someone, work with someone who was real, who was living out their faith with all the foibles, all the bruises, all being a regular, real person who showed you could live out your faith in holiness, but you weren't a plaster of Paris saint. Mother was never like that. She would tell us things and do things at times and say, well, you know, this is what Jesus put on my heart. And we'd say, oh, really, Mother? And she said, it's not like I heard his voice or anything. It's just this is what I feel. And we used to think, wow, you know, if she had told us she heard Jesus' voice, which I think in many times she did in the past, and other saints as well, we would have certainly believed her. But she was so real and so much a part of the team here in the way she treated the people she worked with as family. That was always what it was about. She suffered along with us. She wanted everybody to see that God still loved them no matter how tough life was, and you should always have hope. For Mother, it was always about hope.
You mentioned her mission and helping carry out her mission that really God had entrusted to her. How do you think we at EWTN today can stay true to her vision going forward?
Well, I think Veritatis Splendor is what it's really all about. It's a splendor of truth. Stay close to Jesus, especially through the Eucharist, the love of the priesthood. I think through the wonderful expansion of EWTN News, a vision Mother always had with the addition of the Register, and now our wonderful show News Nightly, and our Pro-Life Weekly program, and the other program having to do with Catholic University. I think all of those are extensions of reaching into the culture with the truth. Obviously, Raymond Arroyo was a pioneer with the world over, and now our reach around the globe in multiple languages, things happening in Hungary and Poland and Sweden and so many places that make no sense at all, except to God's mind it makes plenty of sense, and to Mother Angelica always trusted in going forward with one foot in the air and a queasy feeling in her stomach, but always following the path as shown by the Lord.
It truly is miraculous and such an important mission that we continue to carry out to this day. Doug Keck, President and Chief Operating Officer at EWTN, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much, Wyatt. Keep up the great work.
In a company email, Chairman of the Board and CEO Michael Warsaw asked EWTN staff to keep Mother in our prayers as we mark the anniversary of her death. He writes, "Please join me in giving thanks to God for the many graces He continues to bestow on this network founded on faith. May Mother's life and witness to God's providence always be an example to us as we carry on the mission of EWTN." And you can join on a special rosary for the anniversary of Mother Angelica. It will air tonight at 9:30 Eastern right here on the Global Catholic Network. And our news partners at the Catholic News Agency asked how Mother Angelica touched your lives. You can see the responses right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com.
Up next, hitting the right notes. The Pope's Choir may be coming to your city. And a group of nuns in Poland finds a unique way to raise money for a good cause.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Knights of Columbus is committing $1 million in aid to Christians in Iraq and Syria. Since 2014, the Knights have provided almost $19 million to help Christians and other religious minorities in the region. Archbishop Warda of Erbil, Iraq, says without the money from the Knights, Christianity might already have been driven out of Iraq completely. As always, we thank the Knights for their support of this program. The Sistine Chapel Choir is coming back to the United States. Today, the Pope's Choir, as it's known, announced their first ever national tour with performances coast to coast. The chorus, which sings at papal events, visited the U.S. last year, but only made stops in Washington, D.C., New York, and Detroit. In July, they will visit Atlanta, New York, St. Louis, Detroit, Miami, Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles. For more information, you can head to SistineChapelChoirTour.com. And finally tonight, a group of Catholic nuns in Poland is raising money for their orphanage. And judging by the following video, it might just work out. The nuns say they needed $88,000 for the upgrades, so they made a video pretending to be prepping for a boxing match. At the end, they say in Polish, "We will fight. Check out what for," with a link to the orphanage. The nuns have raised around 1/3 of the needed funds. I was half expecting to see Sylvester Stallone step out of there at some point. We thank you for watching tonight. With the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. In honor of the Pope's Choir Tour announcement, we'll leave you with more of their beautiful sound. Good night, and God bless.